was at work at the Bank of Hiroshima on August 6, 1945, when she witnessed horrors that would haunt her for the rest of her life. At approximately 8:16 a.m., an atomic bomb was dropped on her city. She witnessed the flesh burn off her co-workers before she lost consciousness herself. She was our age, only 20 years old, and according to Eiko Swada's study on psychosocial effects from atomic bombings, she would never again be able to have a normal life in society. I discovered hundreds of survival accounts similar to this one during my research. The bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki by United States forces is one of the most controversial events in American military history, and the justification for these bombings remains a heated topic of debate among leading historians. In your surveys, each one of you expressed you had some knowledge about these atomic bombings. During this speech, I will discuss the context and background of the bombings, as well as arguments for and against this action in order to enhance your knowledge on the topic. On December 7, 1941, the Japanese Imperial Navy launched a devastating surprise attack on the United States naval base known as Pearl Harbor. This was a sneak attack without warning. America was still neutral, and I was in no way prepared for this. This sent shockwaves through the nation. President Roosevelt described December 7th as a date which will live in infamy. This immediately sparked America's involvement in World War II, and more specifically, war in the Pacific. Fighting in the Pacific was brutal, violent, and very deadly. Final casualty reports from the Pacific War Online Encyclopedia list over 100,000 American deaths and approximately 1.7 million deaths by the end of the war. A million deaths of Japanese by the end of the war. This ended in defeat of the Japanese Navy and blockade of the Japanese home islands in 1945. This appeared to be a stalemate, but this was ended by the atomic bombing. Historians are divided on the usage of atomic weapons to end the stalemate. I'll now move to discussing arguments presented by those who believe that the bombing was the right course of action. Many historians justify the use of the atomic bomb as a way to end the war quickly, avoid invasion of Japan, and in the end actually save more lives. The maintained blockade of Japan was causing more and more deaths each day. And the goal of a blockade, according to Robert C. Rubel, written for the Naval War College Review, is economic strangulation. America was attempting and succeeding in blocking Japan from food supplies, ammunition, and just construction supplies. A large amount of the country, especially women and children, at this point was living on a sub-starvation diet. They had very little, and it was likely that if this was to continue, thousands and thousands would have died of starvation. Historians argue that the bombings were the only thing that shocked the Japanese military into submission, bringing about the surrender of Japan. Historians argue that there would have been more casualties, way more casualties, had the United States decided to invade Japan. A quote by historian Charles Ladesman, writing for the Philosophical Forum, describes concerns over an invasion of Japan. He says that it was understood that if the Japanese fought like they did in defending Okinawa and other islands, refusing to surrender, fighting to the death, and utilizing suicide bombers against Allied forces, casualties would have been enormous. Charles Ladesman goes on to say that 14,000 Americans lost their lives in Okinawa, a body of land that was much smaller than the home islands of Japan. In a video documentary, Father Wilson Miss Campbell, a professor of history at Notre Dame University, described the doctrine of Ketsugo, meaning decisive battle. This was heavily implemented in Japanese society, and it was a form of death before dishonor. Do not dishonor yourself or your family, but instead be killed by the enemy before you surrender. This was being employed in schools and everywhere throughout Japan. As you can see in the picture, these girls seem to be no older than middle school or high school, and they're being trained to use bamboo sticks as Japanese officers look on. It is very likely that these girls would have been put into a national militia and sent headlong into the American rifles, armed with nothing but bamboo sticks. So as you can guess, casualties would have been enormous. Now that the arguments favoring the atomic bombings have been explained, I will move on to discussing arguments against the bombings. There are many historians that believe that the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki was unjustified and unnecessary. Some believe it was a political statement directed at the Soviet Union and an already developing Cold War. Douglas Lackey, also writing for the Philosophical Forum, is quoted saying that, for the Japanese, The bombing caused mass death and immense suffering. For the Americans, it betrayed ideals of non-combatant immunity that many soldiers and airmen had given their lives to sustain. Up to this point in the war, Lackey argues that, for the most part, Americans were able to maintain a moral high ground. They weren't committing atrocities as the Nazis had or as the Russians had. But he argues that this was all tarnished with this bombing, the bombing of civilians. It is also argued in the Journal of Historical Review by Mark Weber that the Americans could have demonstrated the power of the bomb elsewhere. Hiroshima and Nagasaki were populated city centers, filled with women, children, and other civilians. Mark Weber argues that a military base could have been bombed, or at really anywhere. As you saw earlier in the slides, the mushroom cloud, that picture's massive, or that it's massive, could have been seen miles away. Mark Weber felt that we missed an opportunity we could have still shown our strength with the bomb, but not killed so many civilians. Yukiko Kishiro, writing for the American Historical Review, argues that the United States wasn't focused on Japan at the end of the war, but rather it was focused on the Soviet Union's movement in Asia. It was clear at this point in the war, before World War II had even ended, that the Cold War had begun. There was a fear of Japan being invaded by Russians. Kishiro goes on to explain that Stalin requested a joint occupation of Japan, which the United States was quick to reject. The Russians were moving through Eastern Europe and parts of Asia, and in each area they liberated, they were setting up communist regimes. This terrified the American government. Historians argue that because of this fear, that we wanted to use the atomic bomb to show our strong power against Japan, or not Japan, against the Russians. These are the arguments of those who oppose the atomic bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. In conclusion, the atomic bombing of Japan is still a widely debated and controversial issue, and as the years go on, the sides become more and more polar. There is no right or wrong answer or definite course of action. It is impossible to accurately predict how alternatives to the bombing would have been conducted. Now that you have been informed, it is up to you to decide. Should Americans have bombed Japan, or was it a useless loss of life? Thank you.